I wanted to make this film to encourage more people to consider adoption. Having first-hand experience of going through it, I decided to drive back to the northeast and talk to those people who've helped me on my journey. Because my memory of that time is quite hazy, I was keen to find out how it all went from the key people involved.
The first memories was when you walked in the room and you smiled, you just lit the room up. It was absolutely fantastic. When I got here, I was so nervous, and you must have been the same, and you just gelled right in with the family. In them first few weeks, you were as though you didn't know things. It's like I used to do the ironing, and what's the iron for? What are coat hangers for? Which you didn't know. It was just certain things, and I thought, God, you've been like so sheltered. And now you're coming out and you're learning different things and seeing different things.
I remember so much about you from when you first sort of came into my life, as it were. And the first thing that I read about you, I really formed a picture of who you were. But then the first time that I met you, you were just a lovely little boy, and probably the little boy that I most fell for, because I used to see an awful lot of children, and it might sound strange for some people to hear, but some children you like, and some children maybe not quite as much. But no, you were definitely the one that I fell for.
Before I was fostered, I think my life wasn't that great. It was quite chaotic, and it wasn't exactly the best environment for a child to grow up in, but I struggle to really remember that. So it's mostly from what I've been told by other people that I think I remember.
You can get some children in and you don't know the trauma, what they've been through. So you have to be with these kids, and you're thinking, God, what have they been through, what have they done, what's happening to them all the time? And you have to try and give them love and teach them what they haven't been taught before. I love fostering. The thing is, I've got a lot of love to give. So I think if I could give more love into other kids, I will. I used to work at the hospital in delivery and special care baby unit, and I used to see all the different kids what were coming in, and they used to be on drugs and weaning them off and different things like that. And I says to my husband, oh God, I really want to foster, but it wasn't the best time with my kids, with my youngest one. So we waited, and then finally we become foster carers, and it's the best thing I've ever done in my life, and the best job I've ever done in my life. I used to take you down the caravan. You used to have your wellies and all that on, and take you different places, and you were just your eyes were just open where you'd seen all these different things, and Scarborough and the motorboats, and used to take it everywhere, and you just loved it. It was absolutely fantastic for you. Now I used to look at you to see, and you used to get yourself so excited, and you used to go to car boot sales. Oh, Nini, can you have this? Oh, Nini, can I have this? And it was just so lovely. You were just such a happy little kid. It's lovely and loving. Ben, you really were. You were fantastic.
It was good to catch up with faces from my past and hear some stories that I'd either never heard before or had forgotten about over time. That period of my life isn't something I really think about or dwell on now. It almost feels like they're talking about someone else.
You were about 5 when we started looking for parents for you, and then particular, it was really difficult. Once children hit 4, people were looking for babies and young children. So you were 5, so you were right on the edge of where people who were wanting to adopt were looking for the age for. So having said that, we'd had children older than you adopted as well, so, but I knew that I just needed somebody to read about you and meet you, and they would absolutely be as smitten as I was. So once we'd got people interested in you, it was easy after that. It was just getting people to think about taking, and I know 5 isn't old, it's very young, but people to start thinking about taking an older child. And then once of course your dad's read about you, then it was easy.
When I was told I was going to be adopted, I think I didn't quite understand what that meant, as I'd done so much moving around. To me it just seemed like just another move. So it hadn't really clicked in my mind what that meant for me.
There used to be a newspaper called Be My Parent, and that was full of adverts for children, and you'd get a photograph and a little description underneath. And if people were interested, then they would get in touch and we'd tell them more. And I think at that time they were online as well. And then once people got in touch with us, we would find out from their social workers, so the adopters' social workers, more about them. And if we thought that they seemed like the sort of people we were looking for, we would get in touch with them, tell them more about you, find out more about them, and we would shortlist the ones in order of what we thought were the ones we wanted. And for you, the shortlist, basically, your dads were at the top.
The process to get accepted as adoptive parents was probably one of the most stressful things I've ever had to do. Very intrusive, asking lots and lots of questions, all sorts of information required. We had weekly sessions where our social worker assigned to us would come to the house and literally go through elements of the application form, if you like, and asking you about your finances, your family circumstances, your relationship, your motivation, what your friends and family would think.
When we were looking to become adoptive parents, we had to go through a really long process, and it seemed to take an absolute age, months and months of training sessions that we had to do first.
You had a cohort of prospective adoptive parents, and you would get together every so often, perhaps for, I don't know, half a day at a time, and you would have some experts talking to you about the adoption process. And almost, I remember once we went to one session and Dad and I, we left at lunchtime because there was a break, and we drove up to Sainsbury's and just sat in the car almost with our head in our hands, because it had been really, really hard going and quite tough. And they were talking about the fact that a lot of kids who are put up for adoption will have all sorts of health and developmental issues, and fetal alcohol syndrome, and all of these things that you've never ever heard of. And it's a case of, I think they're preparing you for the worst, in the sense of, you know, this could be reality, but you kind of like think, oh my God, we're going to get this dreadfully damaged child. What are we going to do? We're not going to be able to cope.
Then a social worker would come and do a report on us, and we seemed to just go over and over the same old ground. So it did take an awful long time, and it was quite frustrating because the social worker kept losing stuff and forgetting stuff that she'd asked us. So all in all, it took about 18 months for us to get accepted as adoptive parents, but obviously worth it in the long run.
So once we knew that we were going to be matched with you, and it was likely that we'd get approved at panel, we built up a very good rapport with your foster parents, Denise and Derek, and rather naughtily, they shouldn't have done it, but I'm glad they did, we arranged to have a phone call with you just to say hello, and what potentially could have been just 5-10 minutes or so ended up being probably about an hour, something of that ilk. And I always remember we were sat on the bottom step at home just listening to this little boy who was about to become our son, and it brought it home so much how real this was actually happening finally.
It was just amazing, but you were asking the strangest of questions. So you were asking what colour our cat was, you were asking if we had a swimming pool, all these kind of things, and you just didn't stop talking. It was just constant questions and stuff from you, and it was lovely.
No, it was lovely. We just sat there, you know, tears flooding down our eyes afterwards, thinking we've just spoken to our son. It was amazing.
So when we think we've found the right parents for a child or for children, I think the first feeling as a social worker that you have is the massive responsibility that it is, because not only are we on a path to directing how your life's going to go, we're also on a path of directing how the adopters' lives are going to be, and it's them and their extended family, it's you and your extended family, and it is probably the biggest responsibility of any job that you can ever have.
When we got told by the panel that we'd been matched and approved with you, it was a real mixture of emotions. I mean, there was elation, you know, so happy in terms of wow, after all of this lengthy process, it's finally happening, you know, it's real. There was also a bit of a sense of foreboding, fear, and right, this is happening. We're going to be handed this child who is going to be our son. What do we do?
I remember the moment when we were told that you were going to be our son. It was a very emotional moment. I can picture where I was sat. I was drinking a cup of orange squash out of a plastic cup. I can picture the guy that came and told us, who was the chairman of panel, and it was just such an overwhelming feeling that you're being told that yes, you're going to be a parent to this child. And we still hadn't met you, of course, at the time, but it was still very emotional, and I admit I did shed a tear.
I'd reached the part of my journey where my life was going to change completely. I would be leaving Hartlepool, my home for the first 7 years of my life, and moving to Darlington to join my new family.
The first time we met you was, well, it'll stay in here, you know, till the day I die. It was a really strange situation. I mean, we literally had just been at panel where we'd been approved. The match had been approved with you. So we'd been in a community centre across town. And then it was a case of, right, congratulations, you know, this is your new son. Okay, let's jump in the car and go and meet him.
It was quite strange because we were coming into somebody else's home, and this little boy kind of runs up to the front door when we rang the doorbell and brought us in. And one of the first things you were saying to us was, I'm going to call you Dad Simon and I'm going to call you Dad Nick. And that just seemed to break the ice, and we seemed to hit it off straight away. It was lovely. We sat on the sofa and we had a picture together, which we still treasure, that first picture of us as a family. But a magical moment, and you know, you were everything we expected you to be and more.
The first time I met my new dads, I've been told that I went up to them and I told them that I was going to call one of them Dad Simon, one of them Dad Nick. And I think that left quite a big impression on them. But for me, I can't really remember it. It all just kind of blended into one big movement.
So when you become accepted as a parent for a child to be adopted, you go through a handover period for a couple of weeks usually to gradually introduce the child to the new family and to start bringing some of their stuff over to their new home.
Each day, either we would go to Denise and Derek's to collect you, or they would bring you over to ours. And I always remember that the car boots seemed to be constantly open, and then because you came with, you know, loads of clothes one day, and then the next day there'd be loads of teddies and toys and things. And it was a, you know, I think to start with, I think we had you for a few hours, and then you stayed overnight, and then it gradually got longer in terms of the periods apart from your foster carers, because obviously you were getting more used to us and feeling more comfortable, and that's the idea behind it.
The handover was very hard. I found it very difficult. And the thing what sticks in my mind is we were on the stairs, me and you, and I can remember you saying, "I'm not coming back, Nini, am I?" Well, that was it. It was awful.
I will never forget the phone call we got from your foster parents just after we'd taken you, in floods of tears, absolutely devastated to be losing you. She was delighted that you'd found a new loving family, but she was just devastated to lose you, and that was really difficult to hear her talking like that, because we just knew, you know, how hard that must be for her to hand the child over.
I had to keep thinking where you come from and where you were going, but it was the hardest thing. I just don't like handovers with kids. I wish I had a big mansion and keep all these together. That's what I wanted to do.
Once I was adopted, my life changed quite drastically, as I had a big house. I had lots of new things which I never really had before. I got a cat, which was quite a big thing for me as a child, because it meant a lot to me, because I knew then that I was now being loved for the first time.
I think those early few months took quite a bit of time for us all to get used to being a new family, but we soon settled into a routine, and now I can't imagine anything different.
What's it like having you as our son? Wonderful, lovely, frustrating sometimes, challenging. I think it's challenging for any parent with a child. The difference for adoptive parents is that you don't really have those first few months and years to get used to being together when the child is a baby. So for us, we suddenly had this 7-year-old who was full of energy and running absolute riot. And there were some moments when we thought, you know, what have we done? But then you'd come and throw your arms around us and give us a big hug, and then we knew exactly why we did it.
Having you as our son is one of the most amazing things. I think it's by far the best thing I've ever done. It's tremendous being a parent and having you as our son rather than any other child. It's not without its frustrations. There can be lots of joy, there can be lots of happiness. There can also be periods of banging your head against the brick wall almost, in terms of, you know, frustrations, but that's not because you're an adopted child, that's just because you're a teenager. Also, I suppose, tremendous sense of pride in terms of how you've actually turned out, and, you know, the young man that you've become. You did well with your GCSEs, you achieved your gold DFE, you know, you've gone on to do some great things, and when this little boy first arrived, you could hardly read or write, and, you know, you have progressed so much. Yeah, it's amazing.
For me personally, the best bits of being adopted is really just being loved properly for the first time, because it's made a huge difference in my life, actually having people there that care and that have looked after me, because it's quite important for me, as it has made a huge difference throughout my life. If I was going to give anybody going through foster care or the adoption process any advice, I would tell them just to let it happen and go through it and accept any changes that are coming to you, because it is going to be a big change, but it does make quite a good difference in your life, because it gives you a new perspective on how things can actually be in the world. And it will be quite a difficult time as you're going through it, but as you get older and your life goes on, you realise that it's such a small thing to happen, but it has made such a huge difference to you.
If I was going to give advice to people that were thinking of adopting, I would say really think it through. It's not just a baby or a little child that you're adopting. You're adopting an older child, a teenager, an adult. They're going to become all those things. They're not going to stay that little child for very long. And adopt for the right reasons. It's got to be about what you can do for that child. It's not got to be what that child is going to do for you, because they don't have that responsibility. They're just a child. You've got to be the one that puts everything into it and run the risk that you might not get very much back, because children don't know that they're supposed to make adults happy. That's not part of their job description. Children are children, and they get on with being children. So I would like to say that I see an awful lot of people coming to adoption for the wrong reason, and that's because they want to replace the child that they hoped they were going to be able to have. And they've got to put all of that to one side and think, I'm adopting a child who's already here, who's already experienced lots of things, and I've got to take that child as they are, with everything that they're going to bring with them, and give them everything that I can give them, and not look for what I'm going to get back from them.
Go for it. It's the best thing that I've ever done. And if you've got love to give, why not give it and share it and help other families at the same time?
If I was asked to give advice to someone considering adoption, I think you've got to go into it with your eyes open. You've got to understand that it can take a long time, and it's a lifelong commitment. You know, they say the dog is for life, not just for Christmas. Well, an adoptive child, a child, is a lifetime commitment, and you need to remember that. It's not all plain sailing along the way. There will be highs and lows, and that's not because you've adopted a child, it's just because you have a child per se. Whether the child is your biological child or a child that you have adopted, there's no real difference. That's how it is.
If somebody is considering adoption, I always say to them, think long and hard about the whole process. You know, it's not just about getting a little child. They do grow, funnily enough, and get bigger, and the relationship changes as they get older. You know, still in a good way, but it can still change. So people have to realise that they're in it for the long term. And they have to be sure that they're happy to take on a child that really they don't know anything about. So you don't know whether there's going to be issues, you don't know, how they're going to adapt to the new family life. So think about it well, plan well, be prepared for every eventuality, but go for it, because it is the most wonderful, enriching, loving experience that you can go through, and being a parent is just amazing.
If I was going to say anything to someone thinking of becoming an adoptive parent, I'd tell them just go for it, because it's not about what that child can do for you, it's about what you can do for the child and the difference you can make in their lives. Because adopting a child, for you, yeah, you're getting more family, but for them it can mean the absolute world. It can turn their life completely upside down, and it can make it 100 times better. So go for it and just do it.